So one of the question was, how do we share our ORM as a REST service? And one of the solutions, there are a few. You can do OData, you can do WCF, even if now for Netcore and Net5 is not going to move forward. But one of the solutions is XPO Web API. So Jose will talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so we do a lot of Xamarin here in the office. So we do integrations with Self application, then we expose a little part of the application through Xamarin Forms. So we used to have web services, and we used to have like OData web services, and it's good for reading, and it's like nice and it's easy. But then when you try to update or insert complex objects, it's like really difficult, and it will break depending on the version of OData that you're using, and so on, so on, so on. So basically, it was a nightmare. So what we decided is like, okay, if it's C# on the mobile side and C# on the server side, why don't we just do like a transport layer in between? So I'm going to do a demo, but first I wanted to show here we have the repository. This is public. You can just go in and clone it. And I actually encourage you to do that. And basically, that's what I have in here open. And let's go to the providers. I created a presentation. Hey, it's not here. Okay, so basically, this is the layout. And what we have is like we have a web server, which it doesn't create an API. It does create a ASP.NET Core API. I mean, you have the verbs like get, post, and so on, but we're using just one verb, the post verb, because you can send more data to that type of functions. So it's like quite simple. We have an implementation in here, and we can have like more than one database exposed by this service. So in the end, you put like as many connections as you want, and you just have to put an ID, like for example, in here, DB1, DB2, DB3, DB5, and this should be DB4. And then you expose it through the API. So it goes through HTTP or HTTPS, like with SSL. And then you can have any client. In general, this is somehow our layout. We have iPhones, Android phones, console projects, Windows projects. In this, you can include SAF, of course, in the Windows projects or web projects. And also, you can run it on Linux or Mac OS. So basically, what it does is that in the client side, you're using XPO, but instead of connecting directly to the database, you are going to connect to our provider, which is the Web API provider. So basically, what we do is we transport the operations, the select operations, the modify operations through HTTP to the server side. So basically, the client doesn't have to have any reference to the database, or it doesn't know which database it is actually. So why we did it HTTP? Well, I used to love like WCF. I think it's a really neat technology. I used to work a lot on it. And when they launched it, like when they released it, from my company that I was working at that time, they sent me to New York to take a course about WCF to see how we will use it. And it was really difficult, and WCF is, it's not complicated, but it's really broad. You have like a lot of network protocols that you can handle. So in the end, we decided to go to HTTP because sometimes if you do a mobile application, persons will go to a Starbucks cafe, for example, and maybe the router of the Starbucks cafe will only allow HTTP or HTTPS communication. If you're using WCF and you're using TCP/IP, for example, it might not go through because the router might not allow it. So the safest way is to do HTTP communication, but actually we will expand this provider to include WebSockets, for example, and maybe any other transport layer that we want to include. But so far, HTTP is what is good for us at the moment. So
Jose, one question on this to get some. So you talked about Web API and WCF and all that kind of stuff. The thing is, it's if I go for Web API, for example, then I have like a public HTTP, or it doesn't need to be public, but you have some kind of REST endpoint or something like this, where you say, okay, get customers, and you get a JSON blob back there, and you have all that get post put operations. And with WCF, for example, you have this communication foundation where, okay, let's talk XML, and now let's use net TCP and do all the communication stuff. For XPO Web API, you need both sides at least need to talk XPO, or
basically, in general, what we're transporting is like the internal communication of XPO.
So you share the same model in the client application.
Well, in this case, Manuel, actually we don't even use the models in here. In here, we instantiate the data store without knowing which model is going to be connected to. Okay. So I will show actually the code, and you can see it because the repository is public, so you can just go and grab it. So hold on, I need to put the new people in mute, I guess. Mute. Okay. So basically that's the layout, and let's run it actually so I can show it to you. So let me first close all these windows, and let me make my machine full screen, or maybe not, because I don't know. I mean, it's hidden by the Zoom menu. Okay, so I will put this like in the corner maybe. Okay, so basically here we have the API provider, and we have the client and the server side. So in here we have a demo. So let's check the demo. So we have an ORM, which I will use between all the stuff that we will open source. So I will use that ORM to all the demonstrations. So it's here in the share folder. So here is the Web API demo. So let's check the server first. The server is like really neat. For this server, I just did like right click, add new project, and I selected .NET Core Web API type of project. I don't want to show that because it will take time, and I prefer to show more code in this case. So if you go to the startup class, we only add a few lines in here. So basically we use a dependency injection functions of ASP.NET Core, and we do is like we create a data store resolver. What is this? It's like with this service you can expose more than one database. Depending on your ID, it will try to go to the configuration file and load the information, the connection string, if it's not there. So basically this is the one, this component is the one who handles like, hey, I get a request to connect to this database, the database DB1 or DB2 or DB3. So let's try to figure it out from the connection string. And after that, you add some helpers for serializations and the communications in between. So basically these 3 lines, which I will make an extension out of this. So you can do something like just add XPO Web API to the service. So after you have that, you only have to do like, you add a new controller. In this case, let's go to the controllers, and we have this controller. So this should inherit from XPO Web API controller base. And then in here is empty. I just inherited from it. You can like have it completely clean, but I did create the override so you can show like, oh, here is like the do command. Here is the get auto create options. Here is the modify data. So you can do something here in between if you want to alter that flow. But in general, if you don't even have to create the overrides. So, okay, that's what we have. And let me show you the settings. So in here in the settings, we have 2 sections. We have the connection string. In here you can.
Also, can you mute? There is.
Yes. Hold on. Let me see who is still. mute. Okay, I think everyone is mute. Yes. So basically, it's like in here you can put as many connection string as you want, and also you can add them in runtime. Maybe your service is already running, and you need to add a new database. So you just go and add one, and you have to put a unique ID in here as a name. And also you have to do the same for the auto create options, because each database might have a different auto create option setting. So you can do database in the schema. This is basically the name as the in the enum object. So after that, here we have like both of them are attached to a memory provider to make the example more simple. So that's pretty much it. So in general, to just go back and say what you need to do is like you create a ASP.NET Core Web API project, a clean one. Then you just add the reference, add these 3 lines. Well, 6 lines. And then you create a controller that you should inherit from XPO Web API controller base. And everything else, you don't need to overwrite it. I just put it here to show that that's what it does. And then that's it. And let's go to the client side. In the client side, of course, you will add reference to the client project. You will see in here the Web API client. And let's go to the program. So here it's really easy. To use this controller, you only have to use one line, register. So this will register the XPO provider. So you can use a different XPO provider that is not, doesn't come out of the box with all the developer express component. Then all of the providers, including SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, they do have a static method called getConnectionString, where you can send some parameters about your connection, and it will return the valid XPO connection string, because XPO connection string are a little bit different, especially because they have the part of the provider. So in here, I do get XPO connection string. It asks me for the URL. Then for the endpoint, I mean for the controller, basically. So the controller is, this is the name of the controller that we are going to access. Then if you do need a token to secure your communication, if you want to create a JWT token, also we provide the functionality that you can log in, get a token, and then make your connection string. I'm not going to show that because it's a more complex scenario. And then the ID. So this is going to connect to DB1. And if you go to the server, DB1 is a memory data store and it will be saved on the file DB1 XML. So then after you get the connection string, basically you can do XPO default get connection provider. You pass the connection string and the auto create options. And basically this will get you a data store where you can init your data layer. So I'm using here the XPO helper. So let's go and see what it does. No. Well, I have this to do is on the ORM, I think. So basically, you will see this in all the examples of DevExpress, especially in the web examples, that they have a class to initialize the data layer and to create the dictionary and so on. So this is basically boilerplate code. And we will include this class actually in one of our nuggets, so you don't have to write it all the time. But in here in the example, you can see how it is and why it's working. So basically, this is like a utility to initialize the database if it doesn't exist, like the updater, and to return unit of words attached to that data layer. So let's go back to the program. So in here, I have, I initialize the data layer, and then I create a new unit of work. In the unit of work, I will use Bogus. Javier did a video about this, which is something like really nice, really neat, is to fake data, is to create like records with valid data. So you can tell Bogus create a full name, create a Boolean property, create a phone number. So basically I'm going to create like, I don't know how many, like 100 customers and then I will commit the transaction. So basically the flow is like, I'm going to connect to the web API, then I'm going to update my schema, get a session, and with that session, I'm going to create 100 customers with the bogus faker API, and then I'm going to commit them to the server. So this is happening on the client side. The client side doesn't have any reference to any database, or it will not connect to the database. It will connect to the API, actually. So basically that's it. So let's run it. So let's come here. Properties. Then we're going to do multiple startup projects, and we're going to run the console and the server. So also what I wanted to show you is here. Since we're going to connect to XML file called dv1, and it doesn't exist, and it will be updated by the server, that file will show in here when it runs. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here and just run this. So this will open up the server. It's a common web API server, and actually you will see the controller that is one of the built-in controllers. And then we will just start the console application, and we'll start communicating with the server through HTTP. Okay, so this is the forecast controller that comes as a demo with the server. It's not all server, it's the web API server. So in here, we did the get connection string. Let me close this, I don't need the diagnostics. So this is the connection string that you will get. So the XPO provider is XPO Web API, then you pass the URL. I'm not using token, I'm using a controller. The controller is XPO Web API, token is empty, and I'm going to connect to the data store with the ID dv1. So after that, it will initialize the data layer and everything that you need to do in XPO. And then we will create a new unit of work attached to that data layer. And we will create 100 customers with the bogus faker API. And we will commit them. And you will see that as soon as I commit them, this file will be created here in the server side. So let's run it. And it's done. So now this application, which didn't have any idea or knowledge of where it's going to be connected, I mean, you just have the URL. It connects to the database, in this case, an in-memory database, and it created data. And I can show you that because if you go to the server part, now you have this file, the dv1 file. So I'm going to stop so I can open this. So the 100 customer that I created in the console application end up in this XML is here. So I will format it. So Control A, Control K, Control F. So in here you see the 100 customers that I just created in the code in the console application are stored in this XML file. And of course you can use SQL Server, MySQL, any database that you can connect. I just did it with the in-memory provider because it's easy to show for everyone. You don't have to have, maybe you don't have SQL Server, you only use Postgres, so you don't have the database. So in here you have the schema, and then you have the actual data here. So here are the 100 customers that I connected. And what I can show you is that in the client, I don't have any reference to system data, SQL client, or anything. So as you can see, like transport your code from XPO from one place to the other, like in the connection to the database is really easy. It's basically just this line, and then you have to have the right connection string. So you can do it with 2 lines without changing anything on your application, and we'll be connecting to a remote database, and it will be talking through HTTP connection. So basically that's everything for the demo. I will create more demos in here. Actually, I just put the console one because it's the easiest one to understand. you can see the flow that is like a few lines. We have been using this for already like 2 years or something. It was not public before, but it's public now. Everyone can use it.